I just want to make sure that the sound is working in the back. So yesterday we had a couple of complaints, and every time this happens, I'm reminded of Stan Malin, Zichrono Libracha. Stan, every year he said to me, we build a multi-million-dollar building with a 12-cent sound system. So every time this happens, I think of Stan. Thankfully, over the years, people have really tried to sponsor the sound system, change it, do things with it. Maybe by the time I retire, the sound system will work. So I'm happy if you can hear me, and if not, sorry. We've been trying for 28 years. Dear friends, I want to share with you a story this morning at the beginning that really made me laugh the other day. It's a story about a couple, Moshe and Rivka, and Moshe is dying, and he's holding Rivka's hand and says, Rivka, when our shop burned down in Frankfurt, you were by my side. Yes, Moshe, I was. Thank God. And Rivka, when those monsters, the Nazis, they came and they drove us out of our homeland, you were by my side. Yes, Moshe, I was by your side. Rivka, now that I'm dying, that I'm on my deathbed, are you by my side? Yes, Moshe, I'm by your side. Rivka, I'm beginning to think that you're really bad luck. Look, there are so many things to talk about that I think we have to begin with a story like this. A couple of months ago, I was on a Zoom call with one of our young people. Once in a while, I get in touch with them, and we talk about how things are going in the university or wherever they may be. And one of them said to me that he felt that being Jewish was like having bad luck. And that was really where I think I hit bottom. In these whole 2 years we've lived through, for a young person who's a wonderful young man to tell me he felt unlucky because he was Jewish. And the truth is that for people in our generation, we have never even had to think about this. But now, at every step of the way, we have thoughts like this. There's an argument in the Talmud by the rabbis whether it would have been better for Jews not to have been born at all. Life would be easier. And believe it or not, the rabbis, like they always do, with the same ease at which they discuss whether an elephant can be part of a sukkah, they talk about this. And they say, well, but now that we're born, there's nothing for us to do. We're kind of like stuck with this. And we're Jewish. So maybe it would have been better, but now that we're here, it is the best thing that could have possibly happened to us. So that's for you to understand that 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, we were asking the same question. It's been with us for a long time. And even after October 7th and the brutality that we witnessed and experienced and everything that transpired across the world and keeps on going even today and yesterday, I hear people when they come to me and they say, I don't want to have children. This is a horrible world. I cannot bring children into this horrible world where they're going to be looked down upon, where they're going to be mistreated. And I always want to answer, but I never do, with what I'm about to say to you today. I want to say to them, look around our congregation. There are people here today, 2025, who escaped Iran, walking out of Iran. There are people here today in our congregation that escaped the Soviet Union. There are people here today that feel lucky they were born Jewish because that's what motivated them to live and build a life. So, when you tell me, how can we face this? We can't bring children into this world. My answer is, how can we not? How can we not? And we have everyone in our families, hopefully not all of us, but I have a suspicion that the majority of us know someone that had stood shoulder with shoulder with those who cause to harm us, who throws lies at us, calumny. We all know young people who have joined the marches against us from within our own midst, at the same time as we are condemning murder and rape and torture. They're joining the majority in screaming bloody murder. I don't have to preach to the choir. I've decided I'm not doing it this year. You already know that the IDF is the most moral army in the world. You already know that if we really wanted there to be a genocide in Gaza, we wouldn't be exposing our own children to going in there to hunt the terrorists house by house. There's much easier ways to deal with this, like the United States does, by the way. But we don't do it. Sometimes I think that we believe that it may be easier to just be alone, for people to leave us alone. And by the way, we've all felt lonely. These past 2 years, every single one of us has felt at some point powerless and lonely and without a voice. Let me tell you what I told that young man in that Zoom call. And I really didn't think of this beforehand. It just came to me in that moment. I said, you know why we break a glass under the chuppah? We break a glass under the chuppah to shatter joy. To understand that even as we are happy to be in the world, as everything is going great around us, there's always brokenness, there's always trouble. It's a remembrance of the destruction of the temple. And what happens after we break the glass? What happens immediately? In normal places, the groom kisses the bride. So after the shattering, the brokenness, the 1 second of piercing joy with the blast of breaking glass, joy emerges again in its outmost form, the kiss of a bride and a groom. So after trauma, we as a people, we always sing. After trauma, we always get up, and after trauma, we always dance. Look at our ancestors. Look at the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah that says that if there's a corner in the street, and there's a wedding procession and a funeral procession coming from opposite sides, and they're going to come together in the corner of the street, which one should go first? And the rabbis say, of course the wedding procession, because life and joy always take precedence over sadness and depression and loneliness. And remember what our ancestors did when they left Egypt. They carried the bones of Joseph with them to remind them, at Joseph's bequest, that there was a time when we were not slaves, when Joseph actually gave Egypt, now our mortal enemies at that moment, life. And never to forget who we are. That our mission in the world is to heal, to sing, to bring joy. Judaism, dear friends, is not about pain. And we have to make sure that we have an entire generation of Jews that does not grow up thinking that being Jewish is about feeling pain. Because that's simply not it. Again, I'm not going to preach to the choir. This is an echo chamber. Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel basically has a right to do whatever Israel wishes to do as a sovereign nation. But meanwhile, we here outside, how do we react to this? Because we find ourselves on the receiving stick, on the receiving side. I want to share with you a story that happened some years ago at the 85th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and I think that Shelley was there as a congresswoman. The Israeli Air Force was granted permission to fly over Auschwitz, but there was a big debate whether they could blast their engines over Auschwitz. The Polish, ironically, wanted the Israeli Air Force not to blast their engines, because they wanted to keep the silence of the sanctity of the place. These were the Polish. In the very last minute, as they were flying over Auschwitz, they all pushed throttle to the full and flew away with a tremendous strenuous noise. Shevach Weiss, who was the Israeli ambassador to Poland, was summoned by the Polish government, and they asked him, "Didn't we tell you not to do this?" And what did he say? "We know the price of silence. We cannot fly in silence, especially over Auschwitz." A couple of weeks ago, let me tell you, we have a couple of dogs with special needs. And when I say that, I don't mean they're challenged, but we have a dog in my house. He does not let his claws be trimmed. We have to put him under anesthesia to trim his claws. I am convinced that that's why Josh became a veterinarian. So it would not cost us too much. So I find myself in PetSmart, pulling Moose into PetSmart. He's petrified of the claw trim. And a woman looks at me, and I'm wearing my kippah, and I'm wearing my pin for the hostages, the yellow pin. And she, like she knows me, she comes up to me. "You're Jewish." I said, "Yes." You never know what's going to happen after that, right? It can go north or south very quickly. I said, "Yeah." She says, "I'm so happy to see you wearing the pin and that you're wearing your kippah. I'm Jewish too." I said, "Mazel tov, great." She said, "I just thought about taking down my mezuzah because I'm afraid that somebody will vandalize my house." I said, "Lady, we're in Las Vegas. It's okay. We have tremendous resources. We are protected by our law enforcement, which is wonderful." She says, No, but I live in fear," she tells me. "But now that I see you, I'm telling you, I will leave my mezuzah up there. I will not take it down. Seeing you here was an inspiration." Meanwhile, Moose is pulling, right? The dog is pulling. I'm thinking to myself, you never know who you're going to run into at PetSmart. But you also never know when you're going to end up being the voice of the Jewish people. And trust me, that's not what I signed up for. Neither did you. But I bet this has happened to you at some point. If you're wearing a star, or you're wearing the tag for the hostages, people come up to you and they say to you, "That is awesome." And what that really means, by the way, what that lady was really telling me is, I am not alone. I felt alone, but there's others like me here. Thank you for being explicitly who you are and making me understand that I'm not alone. The most beautiful, beautiful sounds in life require air to filter to the tiniest of spaces. The beautiful voices that actually entertain us, or the voice of DJ that makes us daven in such a beautiful way, to produce that sound has to come through tiny vocal cords, pressurized. And it comes out beautifully. But it takes effort to get it to sound that way. And if you hear the shofar, what these young men and women did sounds and looks easily, but it's not. You have to put all this might and all this air through a tiny hole of a ram's horn. Whoever came up with this one, really, it takes effort to hear the beautiful sound of who we are. And now a story that has a really surprising ending, even for me. So as you know, maybe you don't know, My youngest daughter, Ari, just got engaged. And she comes to me and says, Dad, I want to get married in Mexico. I said, hold on for a second. I spent my life trying to get out, and you now want to go get married in Mexico? So we actually went to Mexico, to a little town called San Miguel de Allende, which is a beautiful place. And we spent a couple of days there with her fiance's family, and we went to see venues. I'm happy to say we're back in the United States. But on the way back from San Miguel de Allende, we were in this little airport in Querétaro, a tiny city. Well, not so tiny anymore. And we went to the lounge. And in the lounge, the second story of the lounge, there was a young man sitting there. And, you know, for some reason, as we always do, we didn't have the code for the Wi-Fi. So one of us asked him, excuse me, do you have the code for the Wi-Fi? So in perfect English, he says, yes, of course, and he gives us the code. And he says to us, where are you from? So, well, we tell him the whole story. We're from Mexico, they're from the United States, my children were born in the States. Nobody discloses my identity, thank God, right? And nobody says, he's a rabbi, thank God. Because this always happens. And we'd ask him, where are you from? He says, well, I'm from the States, but I do a lot of work in Mexico, so what do you do? He says, well, I used to be a professional soccer player. Wow. And I say, what's your name? You know, this is my sport, finally. He says to me, my name is Jonathan Bornstein. I said, you're Jonathan Bornstein? He says, you know who I am? I said, how can I not? You're a Jewish soccer player, one of only like 4 or 5, that has played for the U.S. national team. You scored 2 goals and you played 40 games and you went to the World Cup. He now is looking at me like, okay, who put this guy here? Right? I'm taking pictures, sending them to my nephews in Mexico, who also know who he is. He says, wait, do your nephews know who I am? I said, look, they're Jewish kids. They know who you are. How many Jewish soccer players are there? So he starts laughing. So we ask him, what are you doing now? He says, well, I actually am an agent now, and I represent soccer players, and you know, that's what I do. And we started talking, and somehow, I don't know who it was, but when I remembered you're going to be in trouble, somebody said to him, you know, my dad's a rabbi. You're probably going to be in his Rosh Hashannah sermon. They literally said that to him. And he looks at me even more puzzled. He says, you know, my grandfather would be so proud of this moment. By the way, needless to say, I asked him, I said, Jonathan, you don't have any tattoos like all of these soccer players. He says, well, because I want my grandfather to love me, he says, right? And he started telling me he played in Mexico. But then randomly, he says to me, I can't believe you know who I am. I have to tell you, the best year of my life was the year when I played in Israel for Hapoel Netanya. You know, he played for really good teams, by the way. He played for a year in Israel with Hapoel Netanya, and he said to me, that was the best year of my life. Not the best level of soccer, but the best year of my life. I said, why? He says, well, it was after my divorce, and I felt like I was at home. I felt like I was where I belonged. So, you know, long story short, we get on the plane. He's sitting next to me and Liz. I fall asleep. Liz talks to him for 2 more hours. She can tell you the rest of the story. But the part of the story that he didn't tell us, and the part of the story that I found out later, is that he actually converted to Christianity. Now, he didn't tell me this, but he made an effort to tell me that the best year of his life was playing soccer in Israel. And I think he did that for a purpose. By the way, just not to leave in a cliffhanger, Adam's family, that's Ari's fiance's family, they asked him if he wanted to go play golf with them the next week. And they actually went to play golf with Jonathan. I really believe that he was trying to tell us, it's great not to be alone. It's great not to be alone. And that's why he went and played golf. Because no matter what you do, this, who we are, what we have inside, it never leaves you. You cannot just get rid of your Jewish identity, no matter what you do. And the problem is that many of us want to do it because of the loneliness that comes with it. So if there's a recipe that we should be cooking for the new year, is how to beat loneliness, how to get rid of it. Look, this morning we read a beautiful Torah portion that's very problematic. Abraham, he takes Hagar and Ishmael and he just basically puts them out there to die. And if you haven't figured this out in all these 20-something years, this is really something that weighs on me every year, this Torah portion. Because I can't understand how Abraham just does that. Well, Sarah pushes him a little, not a lot. And he listens to Sarah. Because he doesn't want to be lonely. He doesn't want to feel that if he doesn't do this, Sarah will stop talking to him. So he does a controversial thing. Just to be in the grace of his wife. Even when he knew that what he was doing was absolutely wrong. Life for grown-ups means that sometimes we know that we're going to be lonely. And we have to prepare for that moment by understanding that we are not alone. That no matter what it seems, we are not alone. There's a beautiful verse in the Torah. Lo tiyeh acharei rabim laraot. Do not follow a multitude to do evil. Well, that's obvious, right? That's what we all say. But then why is it in the Torah? There's nothing superfluous in the Torah. Why is it there? Because it's human impulse to follow a majority, even when we know it's wrong, because we don't want to stand alone. Because standing alone is horrific. And this is what's been happening to us over the last 2 years. Let me give you an example of what it feels like. Last year, at Wembley Stadium, 90,000 people, Coldplay is performing. And in the middle of the show, the singer of Coldplay calls up 2 little girls from the audience, in their 12, 13-year-olds. And they come up and he asks them their name. And they say, I'm Alia and I am Tal. Oh, where are you girls from? We're from Israel. 90,000 fans. There was booing, there was cheering, there was everything. But instead of just doing what he was about to do, he says the following thing. Well, I welcome you on stage as human beings. From one human to another human. Why? Why do you have to do that? And then immediately, he proceeded to invite Palestinian girls who were also in the audience to please come up at this time. That is what feeling lonely, even in the midst of 90,000 people, feels like. And imagine if that happens to you when you're 12 years old. There's a beautiful line that the prophet Bilam utters in the Bible, in the book of Numbers. Hen am levadat ishkon ubegoim lo itchashev. Here you have a people that's destined to dwell alone without integrating into the nations. That's a prophecy in the Torah. And unfortunately, that's who we are. We are different. We're lonely. But we have one another. And that's what we can't forget. We have one another, and we need to have one another's backs. There's a book that I read when I was in high school, 100 Years of Solitude, by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Oh boy, did I try not to read this book. Because it's like 3 Sidurim put together. And my mother forced me, they took my privilege. I was in high school. It was tough, but I read it. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez talks about a town in Colombia called Macondo. And Macondo is an unusual place because there is a plague in Macondo that causes people to lose their memory, to forget things. So you find the inhabitants of Macondo randomly placing Post-it notes on different things around the house. By the way, if you go to my house, you would think that we live in Macondo because this labels everything. Socks, ties, shoes. Oh, I can see the shoes. So they labeled, for example, a cow. They labeled a cow. And they said, this is a cow. Don't forget to milk the cow in the morning. And there's a similar episode in our tradition. God in the Torah tells Adam to give the animals names. Why does God do this? Why does Adam have to be the one to name the animals? Because God wants there to be a connection between Adam and the rest of the creation. If you forget what those things are around you, you will feel lonely and you will not survive. That's what our rabbis explain. And look at our tradition. Zachor et yom Shabbat lekadsho. Remember the Shabbat. Zachor et asher atza lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Zachor ki eved hayita. Remember that you were a slave. We're always remembering. Forgetting is what makes us lonely. Remembering empowers us to embrace those who are like us, who have the common experience, who have been with us for 3,000 years. Naming and remembering are the same exercise. It means you are my friend, you are my brother, I remember your face, I remember your name. So when you feel abandoned, come back to your people. And look, I don't have to tell you this. Again, how many of us this year have stepped up to the plate and have organized in their homes open houses for Magen David Adom, for the FIDF, for the Friends of Shiva Hospital, for so many things. Look at how much we have raised for Israel. We don't do that because we're nice or charitable. We do that because we remember who we are. And that's an act that actually beats loneliness. There was an event that we had here. It was a bar and bat mitzvah project for two of our kids. Boots for Israel. Boots for Israel was incredible for many reasons. Not only because we raised over $100,000 for boots for soldiers, but also because of the amount of people that were here in the large social hall packing the boots and putting them in the bags. By the way, we packed granola bars in the boots so they couldn't give them to the soldiers until after Passover. It was one of those things, small detail. But the faces of the people packing, there were people packing things here that I never thought I would see packing anything in their lives, right? It was labor, it was intense manual labor. And we were doing it because it connected us to who we are. And I'm so grateful that you keep on reminding me of why these things are important. There's a story in the Talmud, Masechet Brachot. Again, another story that is really unbelievable. Where Rabbi Yochanan is healed by Rabbi Hanina. And Rabbi Yochanan was almost like a magical sage. So the Talmud asks, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan heal himself? And the answer of the Talmud is, a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. That's what happened to me at PetSmart. That's what happens to all of us when we're visibly who we are. We free others from the burden of loneliness. And that is so important. You can't imagine how much. Joseph, thrown into the pit, left to die by his brothers. Instead of trying to desperately get out, he spent hours and hours and hours thinking how not to despair and how to be a blessing and trusting God when he got out. We believe in our tradition that the words that end the Adon Olam, Adonai li velo ira, are words that Joseph actually uttered alone in that pit. God is with me, I shall not fear. When you feel alone, when you feel like you don't know where you're going, when your identity is failing you, I actually have some swag for you today. I had these little things made. It's a compass. And in the clip, to clip it to your purse or your portfolio or your backpack, This carabiner says, Adonai li velo ira. God is with me, I shall not fear. When you leave the synagogue today, take one with you and look at it. When there's no one there to remind you that you're not lonely, take a look at this. Hold it in your hand and remember you're not alone. And let me end with the following story. December 2022, we were just recovering from COVID, and one of the great voices of American music, Neil Diamond, and I'm mentioning he's one of the great voices of American music, because last night when I was telling Josh that I was telling the story, he says to me, "Who is Neil Diamond?" Right? Oh my God, this is how old we are. So yes, one of the great voices of American music, who's also Jewish, who played the jazz singer, was tremendously afflicted by Parkinson's disease. He went to Broadway, to the theater, to see A Beautiful Noise, which is a play about his life, and he didn't tell anyone he was going. He was in the balcony, and at the end of the play, he got up, and he started just belting out Sweet Caroline. He couldn't sing, he couldn't move, it was tough, but people started singing with him. They carried him. They showed him he was not alone, even in the pain that he was feeling. And that moment says something that we can use as Jews today. Loneliness is real. The sense of being apart, of being different, targeted, that's part of who we are. There's nothing we can do. But like Neil Diamond in that theater, even when we can't feel that we can't sing, we have to get up and say to ourselves, Al tifros min hatzibur, do not separate yourself from your people. Do not separate. Stay with your community. Be an antidote to loneliness to all this. Even when the world feels isolating, we rise, we sing, we remind each other the Jewish people are never, never truly alone. What?
Sweet Caroline, good times never seem so good, and I've been inclined to believe they never would. Let's all sing together. Here we go. Sweet Caroline, good times never seemed so good.
So good.
And I've been inclined to believe they never would. Am Yisrael Chai.